All right, today we're jumping into one of the most violent, transformative, and honestly misunderstood periods in all of American history. We're talking about Reconstruction and the rise of Jim Crow, what was really a fight for the very soul of the American South. And we're going to frame this huge, epic struggle around something surprisingly simple: a carpet bag. Now, what on earth could a piece of luggage have to do with the soul of a nation? Well, as you're about to see, pretty much everything. To get this, you really have to try and picture the American South right after the Civil War. I mean, it was a society in complete ruins. The economy was wrecked, hundreds of thousands of people were dead or wounded, and the entire social order, which was built on the foundation of slavery, had just been shattered. The future? It was a total blank slate. So, into all this chaos, you have this wave of people coming down from the north. And they brought this new name with them, one that was meant as a deep insult: carpetbagger. It came from the simple cloth bags many of them carried, which Southerners claimed they were just planning to stuff with stolen money and goods. So let's start right there. Let's really unpack the myth of this so-called Northern invader. What does the story of the carpetbagger actually tell us about what was going on? Well, the story that really took hold, the one that was pushed hard by Southern Democrats, was simple, but man, was it powerful. The idea was that Northerners were just corrupt opportunists. They weren't there to help rebuild. They were there to get rich, and get rich fast, through sketchy politics, bribes, and unfair taxes. And every good story needs a villain. And the poster child for this story? A guy named John T. DeWeese. He was a former judge and a congressman in North Carolina, and he was just plagued by accusations of corruption. He ended up resigning from Congress just to avoid getting kicked out for taking a bribe. He fit the stereotype perfectly. And check out this quote from a journalist named Jonathan Daniels. He pointed out that DeWeese was seen as ridiculous and offensive even by his own side. Yet his picture somehow survives as the portrait of them all. And that's exactly how a stereotype gets built, right? You take the actions of one person and you slap that label onto an entire group of people. So in the end, this myth of the corrupt outsider built around guys like DeWeese was just so powerful because it was convenient. It gave a defeated and anxious society an easy enemy to blame for all their problems. And in the process, it completely ignored the much more complex reality of who was actually coming south: people who are reformers, idealists, and entrepreneurs. Because when you actually look past the stereotype, you find some incredible people. Take Albion W. Turgee. The guy wasn't a thief. He was a judge who helped rewrite North Carolina's constitution, who fought for equal rights. I mean, he later argued the landmark separate but equal case before the Supreme Court. Or you find someone like William H. Snow, an entrepreneur who started a real business and actually helped build the local economy. Their stories just didn't fit that simple, villainous narrative. But Reconstruction doesn't last forever. It officially ended in 1877. As the federal government and its troops pulled out, it created this huge power vacuum. And what rose up from the ashes to fill it was something far, far worse: the system we now know as Jim Crow. So, what exactly was Jim Crow? Well, it wasn't just a law here or a rule there. No, it was this all-encompassing system, this toxic mix of official laws and unwritten social rules. And the whole point was to enforce racial separation and strip Black Americans of their basic human rights. You can really think of this system as having two main parts, two powerful pillars holding the whole thing up. On one hand, you had legal segregation, actual laws demanding separate everything, from schools to train cars to water fountains. But just as powerful was cultural segregation, all the unwritten rules of behavior that reinforced white supremacy in every single daily interaction. And you can see how these walls of Jim Crow were built brick by brick. In a place like North Carolina, it started with separate schools back in 1868. Then, a few years later, a ban on interracial marriage. Then they segregated the trains. And then the final devastating blow came in 1900. With things like poll taxes and literacy tests that were designed to systematically strip almost every Black person of their right to vote. It cemented the system for decades to come. The laws were the skeleton, but those unwritten rules, they were the muscle. We're talking about the day-to-day humiliations: having to step off the sidewalk for a white person, a Black man having to avoid eye contact with a white woman, being shut out of good jobs. And if you broke these rules, you faced the constant threat of brutal violence, like the horrific race massacre that destroyed much of Wilmington in 1898. But here's the thing about oppression: it always, always sparks resistance. In the face of this overwhelming system, Black Americans found incredible ways not just to survive, but to fight back. For a lot of people, the most powerful form of resistance was just leaving. And get a load of this number, 2 million. That's about how many Black Americans fled the South in just the first wave of what we call the Great Migration, a massive historic exodus in search of safety and opportunity. But, millions of people couldn't leave. Or they wouldn't. They had deep connections to the land and to their communities, and so they stayed. They stayed to fight, waging this constant, courageous struggle against the system from the inside. And the fight they waged, it was on every single front. You had activists organizing legendary campaigns like the Greensboro sit-ins. You had brilliant lawyers chipping away at segregation in the courts, case by case. You had teachers and educators teaching new generations to question and challenge the system. It was this relentless, multi-generational effort. And after decades, all that struggle started to pay off. You started to see these legal walls of Jim Crow begin to crumble. The victories cascaded. First, the desegregation of the military in 48, then the landmark Brown v. Board decision in 54, and then finally, the huge, monumental Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. You could even start to see the tide turning, slowly but surely, inside the Southern establishment itself. Listen to what North Carolina's governor, Terry Sanford, said way back in 1963, a whole year before the Civil Rights Act passed. He gave this famous speech urging his state to, quote, quit unfair discriminations. The moral weight of the struggle was just becoming impossible to ignore. And that brings us to today, to this unfinished legacy. The actual laws of Jim Crow are gone, but that forces us to ask a really tough question. Where do we actually stand today? I mean, the whites-only signs have come down. The discriminatory laws have been wiped off the books. But it leaves us with this huge lingering question. Have the deep-seated legacies of Jim Crow and those distorted stories that were once used to justify it, have they really truly gone away?